Welcome to Running the Show, a podcast about the intersection of running and business. This week we join you with a bonus episode, some liner notes from our conversation with Tristin van Ord of Zap Endurance. We cover things like the efficacy of that adult running program that the Zap pioneers and champions, the state of OTQs now that the qualifying window is less than a year, Josh Cox, the super agent that also appeared as a bachelorette contestant, the condiment fueling strategy for bottles, and also sustainability measures at major marathons. It really runs the gamut of just things on our mind today, and we hope you enjoy.
Okay, so we're here with a bonus after the show segment because we had some super interesting things that I thought got brought up. Before we dive into the quick 3 subjects that we're going to talk about, what do you guys think about Tristin and Whitney coming on running the show?
I thought it was great. That's all I have to say.
That's it. Thanks for tuning in.
Yeah.
I feel like the friendship they have that extends beyond them just being teammates, I think is really cool because their rapport is really strong. Wasn't the intended means of asking Whitney to be on like, hey, do you want to interview your friend?
Yeah.
But the thought was like, hey, you know Tristin better than we do combined. So who knows, maybe we need to get some more like teammate style interviews for that kind of rapport. I don't know.
Yeah. I did really enjoy their friendship. I thought it was like funny how they were like cracking each other up. Like I just enjoy seeing that in people. Yeah. So like that was just like fun to watch.
The layer that I noticed watching off to the side was that there's an element, because they're friends, training partners, like do everything together. It seems like that we don't know there's a good follow-up question, right? Like Whitney interjecting and saying to Tristin, like, but what did you say to me the day before the race? Oh, that the heat wasn't going to bother you. You weren't worried about the heat at all. Like, I think that's so interesting, an element that doesn't get captured if you're talking to someone solo and it's the first time you've talked to them in your life too. So I think that was something that was kind of cool. The other thing that I thought that was super interesting was the talk actually about having a recent sponsor not sponsoring the team anymore. And that is, I feel like, such a sensitive and touchy subject that we addressed at least a little bit of the fact that we should be able to talk about it more, or runners shouldn't feel a sense of fear necessarily talking about the business side, because runners don't talk about the business side ever. They talk about the performance side, or I went on an 8-mile easy run today and I have a workout tomorrow. Yeah. But they don't talk about their contract and saying, oh yeah, we moved on from this sponsor, or here's what this sponsorship looks like, or I'm running this extra mile repeat because I need to run under this certain time to hit my bonus to be able to make sure that I have enough money for rent for next year and stuff too. So I think that's like an interesting element in terms of like talking about contract, talking about the actual like business side of stuff.
Yeah, I really I very much appreciate their willingness and their openness to talking about that. And I think their objectivity in it was very cool because they did highlight, the great parts of being associated with that brand previously. And it wasn't in a way that was like posturing towards like, well, hopefully that comes back. Right. But I think it was like very insightful. I wouldn't quite say critical because that's a little bit like too condemning of a word, but just highlighting some like areas of opportunity in that partnership as well, I think was super cool to get both sides of the coin from somebody on the outside of it instead of being within it. Yeah. Which is probably the most sensitive place to be, right? Like these are my overlords and everything I do must keep them happy, So very fortunate to have that perspective.
I'm going to ask Drew first, then I'm going to have a slightly different spin on this question. Drew, what do you think of the mix between Zap having had sponsors like Reebok and On in the past as a team, but then also operating as a place where runners can go for a running vacation?
Yeah, I think I think there's a few ways to think about it, right? If you're like on the board of Zap versus just like an outside person. So if I'm on the board of Zap, I love the fact that you've shown that you can successfully work with multiple brands and you can not necessarily become what they want you to be, but you're showing off the assets that you provide to a brand, whoever that may be. So I think that's great in the way they can independently, do their camps and coaching and, the racing element for the athletes too. If I'm on the outside, I am super hopeful for them to, lock up another team sponsorship. I think it's a tough time in the industry right now. It's not as bad as other industries. It's not tech, it's not cycling, but which are two really tough ones. But I think that it is a tough time in the running industry, and for brands that are looking to operate on a conservative agenda, unfortunately, I think contracts that are up at the end of 2022 or maybe mid 2023, they might be leading teams out to dry to some extent. But I would argue that a lot of relationships with brands, between athletes and brands and coaching groups and teams and brands, usually operate more of like an Olympic cycle. So I do think a lot of teams will be insulated from this particular thing. This seems like an outlier, but an unfortunate one, because the athletes are the ones who ultimately have to pick up the pieces and try to make it work.
Yeah. Totally. Emma, you have a lot of familiarity, I feel like, over the past few years, like actual experience being in pro running groups. So pro running groups that operate more in a traditional model of sponsor athletes. The performance is the only thing that matters. Do you think that Keith and Kevin Hansen need to open up a huge property and have people do camps? Or what do you think maybe about other different pro groups that have maybe a unique angle at things and how they can maybe go at it more at a non-traditional sort of role?
Kevin and Keith do a high school camp.
That's
actually.
Right.
Yeah. So they do a high school camp, and they own 3 houses that the team lives in. So it's not too different. I mean, it's a little different from like the compound element, but that Zap has. But yeah, it would be really interesting to see if they started doing, they might do like, well, I don't know for sure, so I really can't speak to it, but
you can make stuff up. Yeah.
I'll just make stuff up. This is our podcast.
Pure Michigan.
Pure Michigan. Tim Allen. But I mean, it would be really interesting to see them do like a Camp Zap, like a Camp Hansen's.
For adults.
For adults, yeah. Because I mean, their bread and butter is the marathon. So like that's what they built their brand on, is like it's the distance project. It's, the Hansen's Marathon Distance Project. So it would be super interesting to see them do a marathon camp for adults, because that's what they've like built their empire on, really, is being the ones who, that's where you go if you want to run the marathon really well, And so I think that would be interesting to see them do that. I don't know if they're already like in the works. I haven't talked to Kevin and Keith in a little bit, so I'm not sure. But their high school camp certainly is not a marathon or a camp. It's geared towards high school running. But it is fun because like we got to work that when we when I was there, and like he has athletes come in and talk, and you do runs with them and everything. But yeah, that would be, I'd love to see a Camp Hansen's.
Do you think it would be like stop by the running store, pick up your tent, and go to the Stone Creek Park and just like
Stony Creek Metro Park?
Find a plot that you just like stake out, and that's your campsite for the night.
It would be interesting. Like, I mean, now you really have me thinking, because they have the setup in terms of like dirt roads. Like, I mean, you're talking like 40, 60, 80 miles of
120 miles of dirt road.
You have a lot of dirt roads out there, outside of Detroit. And so, I mean, you are talking about like, it is an interesting like Midwestern mecca of distance running. Because
put that on a t-shirt.
Come
on. And sell it in the Hansen store.
Just give Emma like 10%.
Yeah, I just need
15%.
Yeah, that's all.
The Midwestern mecca.
The Midwestern mecca of distance running. It's in the outskirts of Detroit, Michigan. So they certainly have like the setup in terms of like beautiful places to run for sure. But no, I don't know if I could really see anyone just pitching a tent in Stony Creek Metro Park.
Or camping out for the Michigan Pro Ekiden. Right?
Yeah. Could you imagine?
No.
I did one trail race in my life where you camped out the night before and then you did the race and they had like a huge party after.
Was this a fire festival?
No.
This sounds horrible.
It was really fun. It actually was like really lovely. It was in Idaho and
Boise Bucks. That's how you paid for everything.
It was really fun. But yes, to answer your question, I think it would be really cool to see at Camp Hanson's.
Interesting. There were 4 points that I thought that we should touch on. It was a good reflection when we first talked about Houston and the fact that there weren't as many trials qualifiers as expected because Houston falls outside of the window to qualify for the 2024 trials. So people cannot use Houston this next edition.
Right. So only the one that just passed.
So just the one that just happened.
The one that Tristin ran.
Yes. So it is traditionally a very fast course, especially for those butting up right against the qualifying standards, getting it packed together. But I wonder if this is a storyline we're going to revisit when people sign up for the Houston Marathon for 2024 and realize maybe with a couple months ago that they can't run Houston. They have to pivot to another race.
They have to pivot to CIM.
Yeah. We'll have the same, I imagine we'll have the same conversation after Grand Miles and after Chicago, right? Like the fast ones that we expect. Obviously, CIM will be a last chance.
The last chance.
I know.
Yeah.
On an aside, we should do live stream commentary.
Yeah.
That would be sick.
For that. That would be nuts.
You know what's really the last chance race?
Uh-oh.
Valencia.
Oh my god.
Valencia is like truly the last chance.
The last
race.
day.
Yeah, it's the last day.
Yeah.
Valencia. There were 3 other points. We mentioned Josh Cox, who is now a superstar agent, was on The Bachelor. He was on season 3 of The Bachelor.
Early days.
What year?
This was, I have no idea. Bachelor Nation, I have failed you.
I need to go on Hulu and watch that.
His occupation was listed as professional marathoner, and it was when he was 28 years old, and he was eliminated in week 3. But Josh Cox, superstar agent, was on the Bachelorette.
The Bachelorette, yeah.
So he didn't get the first impression rose.
That it doesn't appear in the BachelorNationFandom.com wiki entry.
Okay.
But I did find his profile picture, and we can maybe link it. But it's a great.
Whoa.
It's a great photo.
It's a great photo. Yeah.
It's a great photo.
He's looking hot.
Now you understand why he was on The Bachelorette.
Yeah.
I get it. It is funny though to be like professional marathoner and then put a suit and tie photo up. No shade at all. No shade at all. It's just a funny thing to be like, oh, what do you do for work? And then here I am with a tie.
You expect the photo to be in a singlet, like
what
I want Kobe's best chest hair.
I think he was with Reebok, possibly at the time.
Maybe Fila.
Oh yeah, it was one of
Fila
those.
Sponsored a lot.
We just had like a big, sponsorship.
Fila
right
chest tattoo.
Yeah,
just a chest rocker.
That'd be sick. We talked about mayonnaise when we were talking about the condiment bottles, which I agree. And we've people on our team, and we've done testing. Condiment bottles are relatively cheap to buy, but they have a great pour rate. The tiny little water bottles, when you're trying to like tilt them into your mouth, it's super difficult, like you mentioned. But you can put a ton of liquid in them, but having them say ketchup, mustard, mayo is revolting.
Where do we sit on mayo generally? All right, eyes closed.
We're from Ohio.
So you are pro mayo?
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm so anti mayonnaise.
How do you think you make a tuna salad?
I don't eat tuna salad.
How do you make deviled eggs? How do you make egg salad?
I don't eat it. I will say that, and my partner is right off camera, probably waiting to butt in and say this right now. I am anti-mayo, but I'm pro-aioli, which shows
Okay.
me
That sounds about right.
that I'm just a sucker for branding. Not really
Sure.
product, but very
Sure.
branding. Okay.
Sure.
Sorry.
Probably the most famous consumer of mayonnaise in the running world is Bill Rodgers. So there's actually like a photo of him eating his famous mayonnaise pizza.
Yeah.
And he was known when he was running his 180-mile weeks around Jamaica Pond in Boston, doing consistent training, oscillating, between 70 miles and 150 miles the next week. Runner's World has a really good recipe for his post-weekend long-run pizza covered in mayonnaise. You roll out your pizza dough, top that with tomato sauce and mozzarella, bake it at 450 until the cheese is golden brown. Pretty normal, right?
Mm-hmm.
Spread mayonnaise on crust. For a somewhat healthier version, opt for a low-fat or fat-free mayo. He was also known to literally just take spoonfuls of mayo on the porch to just get in calories. This was the 80s, baby.
I mean, I guess, that works.
This is before people could spell whey correctly, correct?
Yeah.
Like whey protein.
Yes,
they were just
probably.
ripping mayo spoons.
Yes, exactly.
All right.
Exactly. And then the last point to touch on, we talked about discarding clothing in terms of sustainability, and do races do anything like that? Articles as long ago as 2017 and 2019 talking about the New York City Marathon and the Boston Marathon stated that in 2019, over 120,000 pounds of clothing was picked up near the starting line of the Verrazano Bridge for the New York City Marathon.
So wild.
More than 200 volunteers affiliated with Goodwill of New York, New Jersey to help raise money for charities. They donated all the clothing, which I think is fantastic. And it's actually communication before most marathons. I feel like now, we will have a drop bin, it's here, and then if not, you can discard something, or we'll have something at the expo where you can pick up and wear it. And then Boston, in 2017, there was an article about them having volunteers collecting 52,000 pounds of clothes. And Boston's much smaller race than New York, and I'd probably argue a little bit warmer time of the year, usually too, but that's a massive amount of clothes too.
That's huge. I know when I said, I was like, I know that there's a big road race that does it. I'm like, everyone who's listening to this is screaming at me right now.
they're watching Jeopardy and you just can't find the answer.
And I can't find the answer. And they're like, Boston and New York.
I know we put the question on Tristin and Whitney, maybe kind of about sustainability. Do you guys have any other ideas about things you'd want to see in terms of sustainability in the running industry?
To kind of piggyback off of Tristan's answer, I really like the subscription service shoe. That's super cool. I know Atreyu does that.
Used to.
We
should get Michael on maybe to talk about it.
Oh, okay. That's a bummer. But I really like that idea. That's super, super cool. Mm-hmm. And so if there was more subscription type models for stuff within the sphere of running, that would be really helpful. That where you could send back your old shoes, to be recycled, or send back your old running clothes. I mean, that might get kind of gross, but at least recycle them in some way.
Totally. I think that's interesting.
Yeah. I think about brands as well, just because I don't know enough about race day operations to dissect things that could be changed other than what seems glaringly obvious, drop clothes and trash on course. So I think at the brand side, even recently we think about the Next Nature, the Turbo Pegasus Turbo Next Nature. I cannot get the branding correct.
I thought you were just talking about climate change.
Yeah.
But the newest version of the Pegasus Turbo, and there was a version of the Alpha Fly that included recycled ZoomX foam. And I think a lot of folks were kind of calling Nike to action because this shoe that everybody is wearing, that many people are wearing on race day, right? The 4%, the Alpha Flies, the Vapor Flies, they're declared dead so early on in their life cycle that this was a response to reuse that foam. So I think that's an interesting way to get closer to it. Even the there are other initiatives that Nike's taken on to recycle rubber and do outsoles that were kind of made out of pelletized rubber. It's pretty cool. You know, even exploring like cork insoles, like sustainable fabrics. So there's a lot that can be done there, but there's so much to learn. There is one person who does a really good job of exploring this. Tina Weir has done a great job. So at Running for Real, she did a sustainability series that went on throughout the fall that I think a lot of people can learn along the way as she challenged herself to learn more about the industry as well.
That's interesting.
Awesome.
The two things that I was thinking of when you were talking about those specific points, there's a shoe that I have from Nike called the Space Hippie. And it was the 4th version of the shoe, which was entirely made out of recycled shoes. Really good marketing around it too. Really cool imagery. And the box that came in was like no logo, pure recycle me cardboard. It has been already made out of recycled materials too. Everything about it was reused. I think the thing that is hard about that is that the shoe is as hard as a brick. It looks cool, but then at the same time, it is relatively expensive because it is hard to make a shoe out of completely recycled materials too, just with supply chain stuff too. So not necessarily economical right now, but it is a good pursuit to maybe like dip a toe into. And then we're talking about races. And I think the thing that everybody can relate to if they've run even a turkey trot 5K locally is the amount of water cups that just get discarded on the side, but the volume of that and having all the trash. I remember a couple of years ago, I don't know if you guys remember this, but the initiative to have like water encapsulated in gel that you literally pop in your mouth and you just swallow everything. It's a little bit more difficult when you're maybe running at marathon speed, and it's very hard to practice that during training because
access to that's pretty limited.
Super. But things like that I think are so interesting because who's not to say in 10 years that AI doesn't look at you with facial recognition technologies. You're coming down the fueling chute and just pop one in your mouth and say, there you go.
With a potato cannon?
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
Sweet potato cannon. This is 10 years from now. But something like that, the implications of just all of a sudden having it maybe be accepted that technology to encapsulate water during race day, but then maybe also for outside of just running races, the portability of that type of technology might make things more sustainable than having just single-use discard items too, which I think is interesting. But again, probably super expensive to produce, maintain, and then the cleanup around that too. Like potentially when it comes to manufacturing it could be tough too. So I thought those were interesting. Was there any other points that you guys were thinking about in terms of sustainability, anything that we had talked about previously?
Just have gratitude for the innovators. Like we talk about the people who like take the chance on the recyclable shoe program and like, it might be losing money, but it will be improved and somebody else will pop up and try to make it better. And, kind of that rising tide for all ships, even like a sustainable option for on-course hydration or even the way that races do operations. So most of the time those companies are doing these things like at a loss or in an inefficient way and allocating resources of people and money and time to do it. So just grateful that people are willing to take the leap because it's not easy.
I would echo that. It's just like, I'm glad that there are people, especially now, I feel like there's a bigger push in the industry to do more of that too. And that like people are really acknowledging like, oh, like we really got to get on this, like whether because it's trendy or because like they really want to save the planet. I personally don't really care if it's for the trendy reason because sustainable practices are still sustainable practices, so I can definitely appreciate that as well.
Thanks for listening to Running the Show, a podcast exploring the intersection of running and business. On Instagram, you can follow us at running.theshow, and on podcast platforms, give us a listen, a follow, a rating would be great as well. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you soon.